All right, you 12 Global Politics. Today, I'm going to talk you through the key terms and the causes of climate change. But before I do that, I do want to talk you through what skills and what knowledge you need to know for this outcome. So, to start off with, we need to be familiar with what the key terms and key skills are, because often examiners, and often the actual paper, will use the skills as exam questions. So it's important to kind of be familiar with that, because you could find that there is a question on that. Like, for example, last year in the 2020 exam, the question was for 6 marks, explain the causes of one global crisis. So it is good to be familiar with these skills. And to start off with, we'll look at the key terms. So in this outcome, the key terms are crisis diplomacy, international cooperation, and unilateralism and globalisation. Because this outcome doesn't have many key knowledge dot points, often what happens is they will combine these key terms with other things. So we have seen, international cooperation be used as they had to talk about the effectiveness of international cooperation. So that was something that they've done, and they've also done unilateralism. So, it is possible that they will include those key terms somewhere. Like, they haven't used globalization in a little while, and crisis diplomacy, I don't think has ever been used. So, be familiar with these key terms, because they could throw them in. Then we've got causes. So we need to be able to explain the causes of one global crisis. With climate change, it would be like fossil fuels and deforestation. So the causes, we need to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of responses by global actors. So evaluate means, we need to talk about the strengths and weaknesses in terms of how effective they've been. We need to analyse the challenges that global actors face when trying to resolve the crisis. And we also need to analyse the key aspects. Now, key aspects are really what makes this crisis unique. And with climate change, this is a unique crisis because, compared to the other crises, it has some 3 aspects that are very different. And that is resource exploitation, national interests, and methods of adapting to and reducing climate change. So those are our key aspects. We have challenges, we have responses, we have causes, and we have the key terms. With the key skills, like I said, you could find that there is a question in the exam that actually says, analyze the key aspects of one global crisis. That's been a question they've used before. What we haven't seen in the last few years is that they actually haven't asked people to evaluate the effectiveness of responses. So, that could be a question we would see this year. I don't think there's been actually an evaluate the effectiveness of responses since maybe 2015, which was in the old study design. So keep your eyes peeled for that, be able to evaluate. So that's one part. So now I'm going to talk you through the key terms. So the first term is globalization. So when we talk about globalization, this is pretty much a key term that underlies the entire course. Globalization links probably to every single thing that we've spoken about. It means the acceleration and intensification of the exchange of goods, services, labor, and capital, which promotes global interdependence. So basically, we've increased trade between states, and then that has resulted in us becoming more interdependent, more reliant on each other for growth. And this has been increased by rapid changes in communication and technology. So, because of the internet, because of mobile phones, because we are now able to connect with each other more easily, this has also been exacerbated by globalization. So in terms of talking about how this links to our crisis of climate change, well, like I said, it's that there's an increase in trade between states. And because there's been an increase in trade, that has led to more emissions because states are wanting now more economic prosperity. And the way that they grow really is by, having factories, by, lots of manufacturing. And so that has led to them, boosting their economic prosperity, but then increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. So really, globalization has kind of been a cause, or has caused and contributed to climate change because of this increase in trade, which has led to more emissions. To kind of give you an idea of this, so with China, as we know, China has, built and grown exponentially economically. They are the largest trader and largest manufacturer in the world, meaning they rely heavily on trade for growth. Trade then has contributed to their emissions because in order to continue to grow economically, they need to keep trading. So, right now they have, 27%, they make up 20% of the world's emissions, and they, have 15% of the world's trade. So really, we can probably say that there's a link there. So globalization has been a cause or has contributed to climate change. However, it can also be part of the solution because, because it's a global issue, it then means that we need to cooperate with each other. It isn't like climate change only affects one country, it's affecting every country. So in order to then resolve it, we need to then cooperate with each other because the issue exists beyond our borders. So that's when we see things like, the Paris Climate Agreement, where states will actually have to, they're all working together to try and limit the temperature to 1.5 degrees. They don't want to get the temperature warmer than that. So we all need to cooperate on this. And it's not like, only China should do something about this. Every country needs to do something about this. So globalization has contributed to climate change, but it's also part of the solution. It's contributed to it because of economic prosperity, because of trade, we are now emitting more into the atmosphere, but then we also are having to cooperate with each other to resolve it because it is a global issue. The next key term we're going to look at is unilateralism. So unilateralism is when a global actor is acting alone with regards for their views or interests of other global actors. So, they are, I think the key part really here is they're acting alone. They're only doing it themselves. It's not bilaterally, it's not multilaterally, it's just one state, one action towards the issue of climate change. In China, and we're going to get to responses. China has domestic policies that are specifically for climate change. So that could be something to talk about there. For Australia, we have, multiple, actions that we've taken towards climate change, like the Emissions Reduction Fund. You could talk about maybe NEEP. But basically here, it's just that the state is doing things by themselves. It's not them, in the Paris Climate Agreement, it's just what is working and what are they doing domestically. And because I'm saying domestically because it is them acting alone, I wouldn't worry about this foreign policy stuff. It's something that I saw in a textbook, but it's actually not in the study design. So I wouldn't stress, in the glossary of the key terms. So I wouldn't stress about, oh, but Mr. Y, you've got a term here that says foreign policy, and then are you saying domestic things? It doesn't really make much sense to just have foreign policy there, which was in a textbook, but we need to act alone. And that is what unilateralism is. And we've seen questions in other, in past papers that have used unilateralism. And I've asked students to, evaluate the effectiveness of unilateralism or a state's unilateral approach to climate change. So when they've acted alone. Okay, the next one is international cooperation. And exactly how it sounds, it's when global actors work together to achieve common goals and ideals. So again, international agreement, it would be the Paris Climate Agreement. This was when, they've signed and ratified in 2016, 189 states all working together to resolve the issue of climate change, all working together to limit the world's temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's international cooperation. Now, crisis diplomacy is another and our final key term. It's when states negotiate in response to an immediate crisis. Now, this key term fits better, honestly, with terrorism. So if you had a question in an exam about it, I think it'd be easier to talk about with terrorism. But I have got an example here for climate change, and that is, in response to the fires in the Amazon. So that was the immediate crisis. Fires in the Amazon. The G7, they were already meeting. So, they were still meeting, but they completely revamped their agenda to discuss the Amazon. So I think that's probably a really important point to say, that they abandoned what they were going to talk about and just decided to talk about the Amazon burning. And their negotiation was with Bolsonaro that they said they would offer $22 million in aid. He rejected it, but that doesn't really matter. They did try to negotiate. They did try to respond to the immediate crisis. If you hear other people say, like the Paris Climate Agreement or the Glasgow Conference, which is about to happen in November of 2021, ignore them. That is not in response to an immediate crisis. Those meetings are planned. They were always going to happen. And the important part here is that we are talking here about immediate crisis. And unless we're responding to an immediate crisis, it's not crisis diplomacy. So that's a really important part to remember here, the immediate crisis. Okay, so let's keep going now and let's talk about the causes of climate change. So, like I said before, we can sometimes see in the study design that it just says the skill is to explain the causes, and we have seen a question like that on the exam. And basically what we're being asked here is, how does this contribute to crisis? How has it led to this being a crisis? So that's the important part here. So with climate change, the main cause, and I think if you didn't really mention this as a key cause and you spoke about other things, you're really missing why climate change has come about. And that is because of fossil fuel burning. For those of you that have forgotten, fossil fuels are coal, petrol, oil, and natural gas. And, in order to have, a lot of countries do this, including Australia, it's cheap and it's low cost. So that's why they use it. It's not going to be around forever. It's not a renewable energy source. It's not, it will eventually run out. And when it burns, it also adds fossil fuels to the atmosphere. So that's how it has contributed to the issue. So what we have here is when you burn fossil fuels, it increases greenhouse gas levels in the Earth's atmosphere. So that's really the first part. And when you burn fossil fuels like coal and oil, it increases the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, which increases the temperature and leads to climate instability. Wet seasons become wetter, dry seasons become drier. Okay, so I guess to give you like a little equation, fossil fuels lead to CO2 or greenhouse gases. I need to do my chemistry again. CO2, which then leads to temperature rising. And when we have a rising temperature, we then leads to more extreme weather events. Okay, I think that's pretty straightforward. But to give you some depth about that, we have seen carbon dioxide increase. Oops. Carbon dioxide has increased from 2 billion tonnes in 1900 to 36 billion tonnes in 2020. So we've seen a higher concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere because of carbon dioxide. And we have also seen, because of human activities, the Earth increasing in the atmosphere, the temperature of the Earth increasing by about 1 degree. So to kind of put that onto the map here, or the graph, we've got here 1900. And then slowly over the last 100 years, we've seen, because of an increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the temperature of the Earth increasing. So, and how do we get carbon dioxide? Well, we get it from fossil fuels. So because of fossil fuels, it is increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, which is then leading to the temperature rising, therefore leading to extreme weather events. Australia is very dependent on fossil fuels. We do produce a huge amount of coal, and we do rely on it then to supply the country with cheap electricity. So, Australia does contribute to fossil fuel burning, like a lot of other countries, but we are a big contributor to that. So that's one cause that we can talk about. Another cause here is deforestation. Now, deforestation is when you are clearing forests. Now, we're not just talking about one tree, we're talking hundreds of trees, thousands of trees, which damages the quality of the land, but it does lead to other issues as well. Why do we bother getting rid of trees? Well, it's for the economic benefits that we get from them. People remove the trees because they want to make space for more agriculture, so maybe some more farms, housing, or for factories, which a factory is going to emit CO2 into the atmosphere. So we remove them for economic opportunities, which is an issue, but I think one of the biggest issues about removing trees is that they are carbon sinks. What I mean by a carbon sink is basically they eat the CO2 in the atmosphere. They store it, they take it away. So if we are taking away the trees, we're taking away, the carbon sinks, which are eating up the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So, but to go into a bit more detail with that, to really get a bit more scientific than me saying it eats the carbon dioxide, it acts as a blanket over the Earth's surface. It blocks out rays of sun, it traps heat at night, and it helps avoid extremes of temperature on the ground. So, some of you may have even been on land in Gippsland where they have actually cut down a lot of trees. The Earth feels hot. The sun is shining on it, it burns. It's very, very warm. So if we take away trees, we're actually increasing the temperature of the Earth as well. So what I mean though about carbon sinks, if we get rid of our trees, they act as a storage for 247 billion tons of carbon. So we are then taking away carbon sinks, which isn't good. We shouldn't be doing that. Also, by removing these trees, the actual act of removing the trees and the loss of trees is actually contributing to more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, 4.8 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year, or about 8 to 10% of annual human emissions of carbon dioxide. So there's a lot of facts here, but basically without trees, we are losing the carbon sinks, which are taking away the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. By also taking away the trees, it's leading to more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So ultimately, final sentence, without trees, more greenhouse gases exist, leading to more extreme weather events. So the carbon dioxide gases or the greenhouse gases exist because we don't have the carbon sinks to take these, to take away the greenhouse gases. So there you go. That is another key cause, deforestation. The final key cause that I will talk about now is a bit more political. This one's not as strong as the other two causes of climate change, but it more kind of addresses why politicians haven't done maybe enough and why they've been hesitant to act. And really they've been hesitant to act because they make money from coal, oil and gas. These fossil fuels add to the economic prosperity of a country. So they don't maybe feel it's in their interest to get rid of it. So they're unlikely to maybe support carbon taxes or other things that are going to reduce emissions because it's not in their interest to take away that kind of money. And also they do face lobbying from fossil fuel industries. So to kind of give you an example of that, in 2018, the president of Brazil, President Bolsonaro, loosened government regulations regarding the clearing of the Amazon for ranching and mining due to Brazil's agricultural business lobby. So he was obviously, there's obviously an economic interest there. So he allowed, the restrictions to be lifted, and then, this maybe allowed Brazil to gain economically. We probably need to find a stat to say what they actually gained economically from it, but if we're going to make that statement. But anyway, he did it because of pressure from, this fossil fuel industry. Then, during that time period, 1.1 million acres of the Amazon was cleared. There was no fines for people that cut down trees. It allowed Brazilian farmers to double crops, and then they were making more money. So really, obviously it's not in his interest to destroy the Amazon. However, because the Amazon is a carbon sink, but he obviously is gaining revenue and gaining some sort of political benefit from this. So, his lack of action has then contributed to the issue, because removing the Amazon or taking trees away from the Amazon is contributing to deforestation, which is therefore contributing to the issue of climate change. So there you go. Then with Scott Morrison, obviously Australia is hugely reliant on coal and other kind of resources that do add to fossil fuels in the atmosphere. He's told fossil fuel executives that oil and gas will always be a major contributor to the country's economic prosperity. And also his coalition partner, so the Nationals, represent regional voters, and a lot of regional voters work in these industries. They work in mining and coal industries. So they are opposed to action against climate change. So if his own, partners, really, political partners, the Nationals, don't support climate change, then he's going to struggle to actually get anything done about climate change. Also, economically, mining contributes quite a lot to our economy. They represent 10% of the Australian economy. So therefore, we're not going to see much action about climate change in Australia because, you know, it contributes so much to our economy. So really here, this is just basically, there's going to be a lack of action because of how much mining contributes to our economy. And we know that mining involves, you know, maybe coal or oil and gas. And so those kinds of, you know, I guess resources are fossil fuels, and that is then contributing to the issue of climate change. So to kind of summarize, here we can see that politicians are not doing enough about climate change because of the economic benefit it brings them. So, you know, even though deforestation and fossil fuels contribute to the issue of climate change, due to the political benefits it brings them, this is why there's not much done. So I hope this was helpful. We've covered now what the causes of climate change are, you know, being deforestation, burning of fossil fuels, and the political aspect. And we have also covered the key terms of globalization, unilateralism, international cooperation, and crisis diplomacy. I hope that was helpful and that you got something out of it. And if you have any questions, you know where to ask.